Welcome back to the last chapter in Multibody Dynamics course using Altair HyperWorks Motionview Motionsolve. In this chapter, we will conclude the model building and simulation of the simple car model that we have been working with from the past two chapters. In this chapter, we will concentrate on the system initial conditions and couplers. The Initial Conditions tab on the System and Assembly panel allows you to specify initial conditions for the systems. The checkbox to the left of each initial condition indicates whether the initial condition is applied or not. When the checkbox is on, the solver default is used. We have the following options to specify in the Initial Conditions panel. We can specify the translational velocity in the X, Y, and Z direction, and we can also specify the rotational velocity in the X, Y, and Z direction. Initial conditions can be applied to any system in the model. Please note that the initial conditions applied to a system are automatically applied to its subsystems. If the initial conditions of a subsystem are set separately, the settings override those of the system above it. Each initial setting that is overridden by a subsystem is listed on the right side of the parent system's Initial Conditions tab. Now let me switch to the graphical user interface where I can show you how to use the Initial Conditions option. So you can click on the model, and here you find the Initial Conditions tab. You just need to select the particular velocity that you need to apply and give its value. So if you have other subsystems under model, say system A, system B, system C, then all these subsystems get the initial conditions of the translational velocity in the X direction of 1000 mm per second. And if those subsystems have different initial conditions, then they'll be overridden by this particular value for the velocity in the X direction, because they'll be defined under the parent system model. Okay, now let's switch back to the presentation and move on to the last topic of this chapter, which is on couplers. A coupler defines the ratio of displacement of one joint with respect to another joint. The couplers panel allows you to define the properties of a coupler. Couplers can connect three types of joint combinations: Revolute to Revolute, Revolute to Translational, and Translational to Translational. Okay, so let me switch back to the graphical user interface where I can show you how to create couplers. So the first method is you can right click on this icon on the Motionview toolbar and then click on OK. This brings you to the coupler panel. This is one way of creating couplers. The second way is by right clicking on the model, going to add and then the constraint entity and then selecting coupler. Okay. And please note that you can input the number of joints to constraint. So if you select 2 as a number here, then there'll be 2 joints that will be displayed that you need to resolve. And if you change it to 3, then you get an additional joint that needs to be resolved. So if you go to the Properties tab in the Couplers panel, then you need to specify the displacement of one joint with respect to another in case of 2 joints. And if you specify 3 joints, then you specify 2 of those ratios. Okay, so for example, if you select number of joints to constrain as 2, then if you go to property, the value you specify here will be the displacement of joint 1 with respect to joint 2. For example, for a ratio of 2, the second joint will be displaced 2 units for every 1 unit of displacement of the first joint. And if you select a 3-joint coupler, an additional displacement to ratio text box is displayed. Okay. So now let's move on to the exercise demo of chapter 15.